Hi everyone, my name is Marcus and you're watching the Reef Nerd YouTube channel. Today we're talking about quarantine. It's not as hard as you think. To anyone who has suffered a large-scale outbreak of something like ick or velvet and lost fish as a result, you know how much pain it can cause. For some, it can even be a turning point in the hobby that leads to them either starting again or leaving entirely. We've been told again and again that prevention is the best cure, and that's absolutely true. However, the issue is that most reefers think that they don't have the time, money, or knowledge to effectively quarantine their fish before introducing them to their display. But it doesn't have to be that way, so today I'm going to show you how simple and easy quarantine can be. We'll go through the basics, the small amount of equipment that's needed, and a couple of methods for doing it effectively. So what is quarantine? It's a method of keeping new fish separate from your display tank for a period of time such that you can be reasonably sure they don't carry any diseases or parasites into your display tank, which once introduced can often not be easily removed. Quarantine can be an observation only, or it can include a medication or treatment of some type as well, the majority of which can never be used in your display as they would kill coral and invertebrates. In the case of one of the most common marine parasites we face, cryptocarrion irritans or marine ick or white spot, the only way to remove it from a display tank with coral is to remove all of the fish and let that tank run fallow, aka fishless, for over 76 days, with some experts now recommending up to 90 days. The reality of this is it can be extremely painful. As with a large tank and certain fish, they can be next to impossible to catch and remove from the tank. Now let's dispel some of the reasons and myths people give for choosing not to quarantine. First up, it's too stressful on the fish. I love this one. Let's stop and think about it for a while. You're a fish. You've just been caught from your natural habitat, put into a box, traveled thousands of miles, spending time with various tanks with poor water quality, so poor in fact that an estimated 50 to 70% of the other fish didn't make it. You've been exposed to countless pathogens and you've probably not even eaten for days or weeks. So which seems like the least stressful option to you? Being dumped in a display tank filled with other fish less than thrilled about your arrival with established territories whom you must immediately compete with for food? Or would you prefer to go in a tank of your very own so that you can rest, eat without competition, and be strengthened before joining the display tank? Honestly, the fish is not going to be stressed about the lack of coral. Fish get stressed through aggression, territory, and competition, not the styling and decor choices of their environment. The next one is that I can't afford a QT, or I don't have room for one. I usually hear this from folks who buy $150 coral frags and have aquarium equipment all over their house. A QT need not be expensive. Many times you can buy everything you need secondhand for a fraction of what it would cost new, and I can show you how to set one up new for under $100. If you're buying used, it can be even cheaper. The third one is that you can't QT sensitive fish. Well, there's always a workaround, you just have to look for it. Need to quarantine a sand burrowing wrasse? Take a glass Pyrex bowl and put a small amount of sand in it. Need to quarantine a pod-eating mandarin? Well, almost every LFS is now selling bottles of live pods. If you're in doubt on how to source these, hit up Phil, the Urban Reefer, and he'll sort you out. I'll link to that below. Now the third myth, and in my opinion, very dangerous idea to be propagating throughout the hobby, is that fish are exposed to diseases in the ocean. That's where diseases come from. They will always be in our tanks as a result and are natural, and it strengthens my fish's immune system to have disease in the aquarium. Okay. However, there are some pretty major flaws with that logic. There are about a gazillion gallons of water diluting those diseases from the fish in the ocean. A healthy immune system can sometimes keep up with that in their natural habitat. However, in our relatively small aquariums, otherwise healthy fish are easily overwhelmed by a much higher concentration of parasites, worms, and harmful bacteria or disease if we allow them to take hold. We have a duty of care to the animals we look after, so in my opinion, just accepting that a tank will be full of disease is not good enough. Attempting to manage known aquarium parasites in a home tank can often be like riding the razor's edge. The smallest bump in the road will lead to catastrophe. So with that out of the way, how do we set up a quarantine system? You don't need a second tank, you don't need a second light, and you don't need to spend a lot of money. I'm going to show you how to set up an effective temporary quarantine system for under $100 that is good for the majority of fish, and with minor adjustments is good for almost any fish. First up, we need something to hold water. All you need is a plastic storage tub like this. These are cheap and can be purchased from lots of places such as Target, Officeworks, Howard Storage World and Bunnings. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes, up to about 120 litres, and most importantly, they're really cheap and usually between $10 and $30 depending on the size and brand. Once it's no longer needed as a fish quarantine system, it's useful around the house. I'm betting you probably already have one of these, likely being used to store stuff in your garage or closet. The next thing you're going to need is something to move water. I'm not talking about going and buying marine wave makers like Vortex and Gyres. A simple pond fountain pump will do the job. This is a 1500 litre per hour pump that I got on eBay for $25. It's useful to have as a spare pump, and you can use it to help with water changes or saltwater mixing, or even as a temporary backup to your main return pump should it fail. I simply put a length of tube onto the output and wrap that in the tub such that it's wedged into the corner. This creates an excellent dispersed flow throughout the tub. The water creates a sheet that gets pushed up the walls and creates a large amount of surface agitation for excellent gas exchange and oxygenation in the quarantine system. For smaller quarantine systems, you can also use an air pump with airline tubing and air stones. This has the added advantage of also being able to power a sponge filter. I found a bunch on eBay that come with multiple stones and plenty of tubing for about $20 delivered. The sponge filters go for about $7 to $12 delivered. However, I've seen them in LFS bargain bins for $2. The final thing you'll need is a heater. Now, I strongly recommend to have a spare heater anyway, as they're the most common failure point of our tanks. You might already have a spare that you use for mixing salt water or as a backup for your main display. If not, you can always pick up a spare cheap 300 watt heater on eBay like this for $15 delivered. That's it, you now have everything you need to start a quarantine tank for roughly $70 to $100 if you bought it all new. Most of what you have bought also serves more than one purpose beyond the quarantine. So you're not just treating fish, these items can provide you with additional value around the house or in the maintenance of your display tank. Now, there are additional things you can get if you want to, but they're by no means necessary for the method that I'm going to show you. In order of priority, you could add the following: sections of PVC pipe for fish to hide in, a Seachem ammonia alert slide, and a hang-on back filter instead of a sponge filter. So with this equipment, you can set up a temporary quarantine system wherever you want, whenever you want. For me, that was on the floor of my living room. For you, it could be a spare room, a laundry, garage, as long as it doesn't get too cold. The best choice is a separate room from where your main display is, as cross-contamination is a real risk that you should watch out for. If you have time, you can cycle this setup either naturally or with a product like Dr. Tim's. However, if you don't have time to cycle it, you can simply place some rock or biomedia from your display tank into the quarantine tank. Remember to do daily testing for ammonia or regular water changes, and have an ammonia binder like Prime or a similar product just in case. You can soak the filter sponge or pad from the hang-on back filter, if you've opted for that, in the sump of your display for a week or two and have it cycled and ready to go for your quarantine setup too. So what now? Well, you place your new fish in the system, observe, feed, and test for ammonia. That should be your routine whilst quarantining. I recommend doing this for a minimum of 30 days, but longer is better. 30 days is typically long enough for fish to show symptoms of the most common fish diseases and pathogens if they have any. The key with this month is to observe closely. Dedicate time to really looking at the fish. You're looking for white spots, blemishes of any type, flashing, twitching, heavy breathing, or scratching behavior. Any of these are indications of potential disease or parasite. If you observe no symptoms of any type for the duration of that quarantine period, again, at least 30 days, the fish is eating well, you can be reasonably confident your fish is clean and free from disease and safe to introduce to your display tank. So now what do you do if you do observe any of the symptoms I described? Well, first, be thankful that you're quarantining the fish and it's not in your display. Now we can put a plan in place for identification and treatment. Identification really is the hard part. Do as much research as you can, look at pictures on the disease forum of Reef to Reef, try and self-diagnose what you think it is, be objective, get multiple second opinions from people you trust or who have some credibility. Not everything is ick or velvet. If everyone agrees with the diagnosis, you can potentially treat for it. If you have any doubt, bring the fish back to your LFS that you got it from and ask for their support. In some cases, they may even offer to treat it for you or swap the fish. If swapping the fish, the new one will need to be quarantined, and remember, your quarantine system is now potentially infected and will need to be torn down, sterilized and restarted. But at least it's not your display. Now in this video, I'm not going to go into detail on all the treatment methods and all the diseases. I will cover some of the big ones in a future video, but here's a few things to remember about some of the most common ones. If treating fish in a quarantine system, cross-contamination is a massive risk and a hazard. Be paranoid, especially if it's suspected to be ick or velvet. Don't put your hands in the quarantine tank and then in the display. Don't use anything such as gloves, tongs, test kit vials, syringes, Julien's thing between the tanks without sterilizing them and allowing them to become 100% dry. My recommendation is to use no tools on the quarantine tank that you would use on the display, and after having your hands around the quarantine tank, wash them with soap, dry them thoroughly, and don't go near the display for at least a couple of hours. If using copper to treat for something, remember that sponge filters and rocks can absorb some of it, so you'll need to keep checking and testing the copper level. Make sure it doesn't drop below the required level. Also, those items will forever be contaminated with copper, so you can never put them back in your display tank. If doing the tank transfer method, cycling between two setups, ensure that the alternate setup is 100% dry before transferring again. Usually 3 days should be enough, but make sure you drain it immediately after the transfer. However, to be extra sure, point a fan at it or a hairdryer for a couple of hours, and that will definitely ensure that it gets dry. If treatment does not appear to be working, question your diagnosis and perhaps consider taking the fish back to your LFS that you got it for and asking for their advice and support. Following successful treatment for a disease, I recommend to put the fish in a new sterile quarantine system, aka a plastic tub on the floor, with no medications or treatments for another 30 days to observe and ensure that the treatment worked. So that's it for how to go about setting up a quarantine system. I hope you found this video helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe. My name is Marcus and you've been watching the Reef Nerd YouTube channel. Bye for now.